Good evening, and welcome to Ideal Live, brought to you by Ideal and UNITE Leander. I'm Shay Tower. Before we get started tonight, I want to share a bit about both organizations with you. UNITE Leander believes an inclusive city is one that values all people and their needs equally. UNITE Leander is committed to transforming the city of Leander into a place where differing life experiences and perspectives are welcomed, valued, and celebrated. Just yesterday, we received confirmation on our 501c3 nonprofit for impact filing. IDEAL, an acronym for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity for All Leander, is a group of 500 plus community members. Founded in 2019, IDEAL has a mission to promote awareness, education, connection, and action in Leander to create a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive community for all. As you can tell by our two missions, our organizations share common interests, and we are collaborating on a series of listening sessions. Tonight we bring you session number 2, Breaking the Glass Ceiling. I'm going to turn it over to our hosts, Dr. Davina Stringer and Janelle Marthal, who will introduce our guests and facilitate tonight's discussion.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, fixing my monitor. I am Janelle Marthal, one of your hosts for this evening. In honor of Women's History Month, we wanted to facilitate a discussion about lifting women up and breaking the glass ceiling. During tonight's session, you'll hear from 2 leading women about their personal journeys and how they champion equity in schools, workplaces, and communities.
Hi, everybody. I'm Davina Stringer, and I am here as a curious leader, a learner, and a researcher. I am in public education as a campus administrator for the past 7 years, and prior to that, I was a teacher in general and special education, and I am so very excited to learn from these women tonight. But before we get started, if you can please ensure that your Zoom line is on mute if you're not speaking, and type the questions, any questions that you might have in the chat. In a few moments, Janelle and I will be co-facilitating this discussion with our guests to help all of us learn how we can make Leander and beyond more diverse, equitable, and inclusive for all.
I have the honor to introduce my friend, Ms. Lisa Woodson. Lisa Woodson serves as the Chief People Officer for Code 42. Her priorities are recruiting and developing top talent, driving organizational transformation, and building an inclusive and highly engaged workforce. She previously served as the Senior Vice President of Human Resources for HID Global, oversaw all facets of human resources globally for 4,000 plus employees spanning over 48 countries. She holds a BS from the University of San Francisco and an MS from Pepperdine University Graziadio School of Business. She is certified in multiple psychometric assessments and is currently pursuing an executive coaching certification. Her passion is for helping people be their best selves, reflected outside of her workplace where she provides career coaching, advising, and mentoring.
And I get the pleasure of introducing Dr. Tiffany Spicer. She is an educator who has served in public education for over 16 years. She is passionate about equity, social justice, and preparing all students to reach their fullest potential. She has served as a general education and special education teacher, as well as an administrator, assistant principal, associate principal, middle school principal, and high school principal. After campus leadership, she transitioned to central office and has assumed such roles as executive director and assistant superintendent. She attended the University of Texas, where she obtained her bachelor's of social work, and she earned a master's in educational leadership from Texas State University, San Marcos. She has also earned a doctorate of philosophy from Texas A&M University. Dr. Spicer currently serves as the Assistant Superintendent of Learning and Innovation in the Beeville Independent School District. Please join us in welcoming both of these amazing ladies. And we also welcome our guests. We appreciate everyone coming together tonight. This is being recorded, and our goal is to share it out pending technology cooperation. Janelle, are you with us or did we lose you? I think you're frozen, so I'm going to pick it up for
Can you
Janelle.
hear me?
Oh, there you are.
Okay, so we're going to say that again. Dr. Spicer, will you please?
Will you please share your personal journey with us, Dr. Spicer?
Not a problem. Thank you so much for having me this evening. Again, my name is Tiffany Spicer. My story, I'm going to talk a little bit about the personal part being professional, meaning in my job as a woman of color. I did not go into education because I wanted to. At first, I was just like, no, I ran from it because I didn't feel that's what I wanted to do. I was going to do something big and bold, but I love children and I love people. And so Lord has a funny way of just making things work the way they do. And so what happened was I went into teaching and I loved it, but I knew I wanted to make a bigger impact. And then I went into administration. And in that area, I went and got my master's at Texas State. That's when I started learning about equity and diversity and truly making a difference in the lives of people who did not have the voice to advocate for themselves, maybe not the wherewithal to navigate the system and things that we kind of take for granted as people, right? So getting my master's opened my door to be an administrator. And as administrator, I was able to make differences on my campuses. And some of those differences, we had book studies. We talked about race and gender. Oh my gosh, that's the stuff that you don't talk about. You know, you just go to class and you just hope everybody gets along and loves each other. But we kind of took the Band-Aid off and talked about some deep stuff that we needed to talk about. And that was in my days in Round Rock ISD and the Leander ISD in Del Valley as well. And so throughout my career, after I got that master's, it kind of changed my trajectory. I knew I wanted to change the world, and I knew I wanted to just talk about the things that mattered to me. I'm a woman of color every day. I don't get up and say, today I don't want to be a Black woman. You know, I don't get that, right? But I love being me and I love the skin that I'm in. And I also like having conversations that challenges sometimes the status quo and that pushes people to kind of think about other perspectives outside of their own. So coming through Round Rock, coming through Leander, and then getting my doctorate at A&M, that even pushed me even further because they forced me to look at culturally responsiveness, something I had never heard of, but I learned and I was like, okay, this is where you make a difference in the lives of the children that you serve and also the teachers I support and the peers that I work with on a daily basis. So graduate school made me the leader I am in education. And so that was a humbling experience, but it's my life. It's my lifestyle. If you work with me, if you talk to me, that's who I am and that's who you get. And even if you don't want to talk about race and gender, I kind of force you to, because I want you to think outside of yourself and think of from other people's perspectives. So that's kind of my journey through the education realm that also impacted my professional and my personal journey about being culture responsive and just building an environment of inclusivity for everybody that I serve and touch.
Awesome. That is awesome. Okay, Lisa, it is your turn. Can you share with us your personal journey?
Sure. So again, thanks for having me. Such a pleasure to be here, and thanks for telling your story. I love hearing women talk about their journeys, and so some similar connections. I think for me, I'm going to go a little bit further back. So I grew up in a household where I had a mom who had a pretty powerful position. But what I learned from a really early age is how I saw her in the workplace was very different than how I saw her at home. So you could refer to that now as code switching. So from the time I was about 7, I came from Louisiana and actually was raised in California, but I learned at a really early age what it meant to assimilate and to try to find your way to fit in. And I grew up in spaces where, gosh, from the time I was in elementary school all the way through 12th grade, I was generally speaking the only or one of very few who looked like me. And so the kind of psychological, I think baggage maybe is a good word, that goes with I need to behave with and respond to like my peers, almost to the point where you lose a little bit of who you are. And then I went through this period of time where I started to rebel a little bit. And I got really tired of always needing to make other people feel comfortable or to speak a certain way or to come across a certain way. So similar to Dr. Spicer, I did not start my career. I actually wasn't thinking boldly. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew that I was smart. I was the kind of person that when I joined companies, I just kind of fell into opportunities and I typically promoted really quickly. And what's interesting is it started to mirror my journey in school. So as I grew my career, where maybe it started with more people that looked like me, each step that I took up, less, less, less. And that really struck me. And so I decided to go back to school, and when I went to go get my master's degree at Pepperdine, it was a life-altering experience. And so my background is in organizational development with a real focus on the science of how people behave. And this particular program required an international component. And so I had to go and consult in China and in France and in Costa Rica, just to name a few. And it really started to expand my thinking about what it meant to be inclusive, about the different layers of diversity and kind of that intersectionality of being a woman, being a Black woman. Well, how does that look when I go to China and I'm trying to have a conversation in Beijing? And so it really pushed me to think differently. And so as I started to build my career in HR, I felt that I had the responsibility to try and bring others along on that journey. And so for me, I think a lot of people think about, well, that's really ambitious and how do you balance family, et cetera. But really, it's more than just me. It's really thinking about, I have an opportunity to create spaces for other people. And so it's really, really important to me to try and do that. And so now I bring that into my work and I bring that into the boardrooms, into executive conversations, et cetera, to really challenge the status quo and to really get us to think about what does it truly mean to have an inclusive work environment where all people can thrive and do their best work. So that's a little bit about me.
That is amazing. Your journey, I see the sign right behind you, and the journey that you have brought others on. What an experience of collective consciousness on that collective journey. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Dr. Spicer, could you share with us a little bit about your experiences with equity programs in each level of education?
Absolutely. There's some informal and some formal, I'll say, experiences. Going to, I was in Round Rock for 10 years, and we had some, I'll say, I grew. That's where I was born as a teacher, if you will. And so leaving there was a very diverse environment, great place to grow and learn and just serve and teach children. And then I had the opportunity to go to a neighboring district, Leander, ISD, as a high school principal. But what I did not know when I got there was I was the first African-American principal ever in the district. So the district was established in 1899. That's, the historical context, right? That's how old it is. And so I heard the rumors. So I made a phone call to the superintendent and I said, I just heard something. I want to see if this is true or not. And he was like, I'm sorry to say, but it is. That was 2014. And that wasn't too long ago. And so that kind of, people were like, you should be proud. But I wasn't, because I was like, what's taking so long? Why do we not have people of color in these roles? Also found out, same position, same time, I was the third female high school principal. And to Miss Woodson's point about the higher you go, the less people you see who look like you. So I was the third woman ever. It was always males. It's majority white males, which is fine, but that's just what it was. So here I am, African-American woman coming to a district that I'm new to, and the other four principals are white males, and they were good guys, love them to this day. But I had to Ms. Woodson's point, pay attention to myself, meaning I had to make sure that everything I did was on point. There was no messing up, there was no hiccups, because if I did that would close the door for anybody who looked like me, who wanted to excel or achieve in those positions. So I really had to make sure that I don't want to say perfect, but I really worked for perfection. And I made sure that my kids were on point, my teachers were on point, and things of that nature. So that was the informal, like, didn't ask for it, but this is where we're going to be talking about equity and diversity. In that same vein, when I was leading my schools, middle school principal, high school principal, we talked about race and we talked about gender because I found discrepancies. So discrepancies in discipline. So what I'd find, and this is an assistant principal, you name it, from just in the career, boys always got in trouble. Imagine that, right? And then boys of color always got more trouble. So I'm very inquisitive. Why is that? Oh, well, they just, or those, right? So I'm very like, let's have a conversation about that. So I had to, number one, be mindful because I'm a Black woman talking about race to majority staff that are predominantly Caucasian. And so in having those conversations, I get research and I get literature. And we talk about the research and we talk about why is this important to even have the conversation. And then I would share personal experiences. And what that did, it opened the door for them to gain that knowledge, but also to feel comfortable to say, let me share my story. Or it didn't happen to me, but one of my students shared this with me. So it kind of built that safe environment to have conversations. So being the person that I am, I had those, I'll say, experiences, but also structured planning PD for my staff to talk about, let's look at discipline data. Let's look at our advanced classes. Who's in the seats? Who's not in the seats, right? And why are they not? Let's look at special education. Who's in those classes? Who's always getting put in those places? That can't be. Because if we look at our demographics, we should kind of mirror it a little bit, and we're not. So we had some hard conversations, but it made us better. Our scores went up. Our students excelled. And at one point, you know, we were, one of my campuses that I was principal of, we were I'll say we were 5th out of 5, right, when I got there. And we came in 3rd academically because we paid attention. And I was like, here's the thing, I don't care about the scores, but if you can build relationships with the students and you teach them and you believe in them and let them know that, I guarantee you will get it. And we did. So it's also some mindset shifting and conversations. Having these conversations, you also have people who don't believe, right? So I had to have private conversations, say, okay, is this really the place for you? Because this is what we're doing. This is the route we're taking. If you want to join, please feel free to be a part. But if you don't believe in every kiddo that walks through this door, whether they're Black, white, brown, purple, boy, girl, whatever, you can't work here. And so I think having the boldness and knowing that I was supported, because I told my supervisors anytime, I'm like, this is what I believe, this is what I'm going to do. And I knew that I could do that and have that backing. That made that even better. Now, you also have, at a district level, I've worked on equity committees and having these conversations. Everybody does not want to have the conversation. And that's what I want. I want you to just be willing to just hear somebody else's perspective. And after that, we can grow and get the work done. So for me, I had the opportunity to serve on 2 district, I'll say, equity task force. One I was a member of, and the second one I got to create in one of my districts that I worked in. And to that day, the organization is working, but not without some trials and tribulations, because everybody does not believe that there is a race problem or a gender problem or any problem. We're just good. It's just money. If you throw a little money at it, all the kids would be great, right? And that's not the case. So I've had to, I'll say, push back and educate and hold firm to what I believe. And that's, sometimes it's been great. And sometimes it's been a challenge, but at the end of the day, this is what I'll like follow my sword for, you know, because our kids deserve it. And if I'm not there advocating in the role and the opportunity that I have, then I'm doing a disservice to every child that I serve. And if I'm not mentoring and building up other women and other men who want to be administrators and who want to change our system and change our world, then I'm doing a disservice. So I've had just opportunities, informal and formal, to where we created spaces to have these conversations and truly make a difference in the lives of our kiddos.
Wow. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a kind of a follow-up question to that, but first I would love to hear from Mrs. Woodson on the same question that you just responded to. And then the follow-up, I think, will just kind of go to both of you at the same time. But the question again, Mrs. Woodson, was could you give us your experiences implementing equity programs in the corporate environment?
So I'm sitting here and I'm listening, and it's so intriguing to me because there's such a connection from what starts in the education space. So the same disparities or things that you're looking at in the classroom, they actually play out pretty similarly when you get into a corporate setting, right? So if you think about the talent that you bring into an organization, how you make decisions about who you promote, the practices that you use for performance reviews, your discipline practices, so who should go on a performance improvement plan, who actually gets terminated for poor performance, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the continuum is actually pretty interesting. So to answer your question, so in terms of what's the actual work that I'm doing in corporate spaces, and so obviously if we think about the last year, I think it's fair to say kind of every company is touting and talking about diversity and representation, and what does that mean? So again, if I go back to my graduate school experience, so obviously I'm a woman of color, I take that really seriously, but I really take the approach of looking at marginalized groups as a whole. And my kind of number one motto is I meet organizations and people where they are. And so I start by trying to create space to have those conversations, and quite frankly, to give people a chance to get it wrong and to say the wrong thing and to stumble and to ask a question where it's really uncomfortable, because you have kind of buckets. You have some people who don't believe, but I would challenge you, a lot of people who just don't get it. It's not their lived experience. And if you aren't someone who had to, I call it play dress up and pretend that you're somebody that you're not, to fit in, then you really just don't understand. And so starting with education, like let's talk about why does your team look like X? And so I always start with the demographics of the US looks like X. Can you help me understand why we're 2% Black, or we're 1.8% Latino, or only 17% female? That doesn't actually match the talent that's available. That doesn't match the talent in terms of certain degrees. So again, you start with kind of grounding it in data, and then you start setting some goals. But I think it's really important. You can't go from a conversation to we have these 8 targets, because what you're going to do is you'll increase your ability to recruit people. You will not increase your ability to actually retain them, because you're not creating spaces where people feel like they belong. So kind of going back to my story of I never quite felt like I was in a space that understood me. And so we're building programs and really starting with leadership and with managers to what are your own biases? How do you see the world? How does that and your lived experience play into, how you see someone? So I'll give you a really silly example. Have you ever been in a situation, so I'm just going to go ahead and name a stereotype, where a Black woman responds to something and she's angry? So I'm pretty direct. I have kind of a strong personality, but I think I'm a deep listener. And if I'm passionate, it's for a reason. But my male counterparts, they're on top of it. Like, they are leaders. They are strong. When I say something or I do something, it's like, hey, are you okay? Or you seem like you were kind of angry, right? And so that is that psychology of how you see people. You're not actually seeing me as a person, you're seeing me as a stereotype. And so really digging into those conversations and creating those spaces where people can be challenged. And I will tell you, I've been challenged, I've been pushed, I've been told, like, you're not going to fix the world. It's actually the reason why I left the really big company that I was at to go somewhere else, because I wanted to be a part of a leadership team who knew it was going to be really hard work, but that was going to be willing to make themselves vulnerable, take risk, be open to learning, and believe that as a business we could be a part of the solution. Because here's the deal. People who work in companies represent communities, right? And so if you can change the hearts and minds of leaders in the workplace, then they go back into their communities and they go back into their homes and they teach their children and their neighbors. So it's a really, really important body of work to do, but you have to, I think, create the space to go on the journey to get to the targets, the metrics, et cetera. And so we're on that journey right now. And we're actually looking to hire someone specifically to kind of really help me push our diversity strategy, but to help hold me accountable. Because the other piece, I think, in a corporate setting is there are so many things that I'm focused on in terms of actually helping to run and lead our business that I can get sidetracked. And as much as this is really important work, well, so are meeting the needs of my customers, so is making sure that our software works, et cetera. So making sure that there is ownership and someone whose real job is to push that agenda forward, I think is really important. So those are some of the ways that we're really pushing the agenda and hoping to make a change.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is a sort of a follow-up question, and just you both spoke a little bit about reaching people that may be unreachable. And while we know we won't reach everybody, can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, take a moment maybe and just think about the unreachable people that you have come across or perceived as unreachable? What successes have you seen? Have you had any surprises in reaching these unreachable people? How did you do that? And especially in that journey of breaking the glass ceiling.
You want to go first?
No, ma'am. Go ahead.
Let me just clarify to make sure I understand your question. So when you're talking about unreachable, do you mean in terms of maybe someone having a mindset that's resistant to kind of going on that journey, or am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, exactly that. Resistant, and also just on your journey of as you've moved up in your corporate world, you have been doing this work, right?
Yeah.
And then experiencing these people along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Okay. So I think that storytelling and being vulnerable is a really powerful tool. So I'm just really going to have to keep plugging Pepperdine. So one of the things I learned in grad school is self as instrument. And what that basically means is you always start with yourself as an instrument for change, right? So typically we approach things looking for someone else to change their mind, to behave differently, to act differently. And so I start with being vulnerable and I tell my stories of where I found bias. So here's, I think, a really big myth. Just because I'm a Black woman does not mean I don't have my own biases or things that don't get in my way, right? And I think that sometimes there's a perspective of, like, you kind of put the underrepresented minorities into a group and like they, which is a lot of difference, kind of all feel or see or think the same way. And so there have been steps where I have really misstepped in a lot of ways. So if we think about kind of what's happening, unfortunately, right now in the Asian American community, when I went to China, I kind of saw Asian as a thing. I really didn't have the global perspective. Well, no, actually China and Malaysia and India, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when people are resistant, I try and start with, I'm going to meet you where you are, because there are multiple times where I have stepped into something, said something, or assumed something, or just didn't believe it because I haven't experienced it. And then I share some of those stories. I have found two things that work: data and storytelling. Opinions don't. Being angry doesn't. Being emotional doesn't. And I can tell you, as a mom of kids in LAIC, there have been some things that have happened where I've been emotional and it didn't work. And then I had to pull myself together and come back with some data and some storytelling and meeting teachers, administrators where they are, because there's something about breaking down the walls and just becoming human. And when people aren't necessarily feeling as if they're under attack, they tend to be a little bit more open to hearing a different perspective. And at least then you can start a conversation or start to get someone to be a little bit more open to pivot or to think differently. So that's worked for me.
And I'll echo you. You said a couple things. storytelling, and then just using research. So in cultural responsiveness, there's a thing called counter narratives. Mm-hmm. So everybody has a narrative, right? We have the American dream, the American narrative, but there's also always a counter narrative. So what I try to do with any group, whether it's formally or informally, I always just try to say, this is me. And I let them see, and I tell them my story. I tell them my journey about, I'm a divorced mother of 2. I've done this, this, and this. This is my life. This is who I am. So they know who I am. I'm Tiffany. And then we kind of I like articles. I try to get some current articles that have reality taking place, because if you remove it from them, it's really not them, but we can have the conversation, and then we bring it on back home. And we can talk about, so what does that mean here in our campus or our district or this space? 9 times out of 10, we're good. People are receptive. Oh, I get it. I get it. But every now and then I've had these sessions where, we're doing it, we're doing the work and we're talking. And anytime I teach about equity and cultural responsibility, I always do it in pair, Black, white, male, female. Never black person, never white person. We mix it up because we want everybody to feel like they have somebody to go to. So keep that mental note there. Mm-hmm. But I have had people who just sit back and this is their reception, right? And so the personal side of me is just like, I cannot believe you right? But I got to put that away. Today, I'm Dr. Spicer, and we're talking about equity and access for students, right? So I have to go there, and I have to make sure that I don't make it about me, but I make it, how can I reach them? So when they go back into that classroom, they don't see, oh, that Black boy there. They see, this is a young man who has so much potential, or that little girl with no money and no shoes. Yeah, I don't want them to see that. I want them to see the potential of the students that they serve. Same thing for my leaders. If I'm talking to leaders who are talking to teachers, and then central office staff who are supporting campuses, I need them to be willing to be vulnerable. So I know I have to do that first. I'll say majority of the time it's received. And what I've also learned is when I do start these groups and task force, I start with the ones who want to be a part. Because sometimes there's people who will never listen to anything I say, and I'm not offended by that. But if I can pour into another counterpart, another woman, a white woman, a green woman, a blue woman, somebody outside of Tiffany, they might hear them. And then guess what happens? They come back, okay, so I was talking to Mark, and he really wants to have this conversation. What do I say? What do I do? Here's some research. Here's some data. Let's talk through this. If he says this, what's he going to say? So I literally had that conversation a couple weeks ago with some people back in the Austin area, because they know this is my life, and they want to make a difference. They might not have the tools and resources, but they know I'm here for you and I will help you. So I think I've learned just to be available, be me, be transparent. This is my life. Like my life. This is what I do. Even when I retire, I'm gonna still be doing somebody's equity work somewhere because it's important. But just making sure we pour into people, build that capacity, build that leadership capacity, so the work doesn't stop and it's not people dependent, and it's not dependent on one person. It has to be a system, it has to be a culture, and it has to be a safe space to have conversations. So, and when you get the pushback, you will. It's okay. It's okay. You still speak your truth. You tell your story. You share your data, and you keep it moving, because you might be the person who planted the seed or poured the water or put some fertilizer on it. You might never see the fruit of that, but know that you made a difference because you're saying the right thing. You're sharing the right thing. And it's not about you. It's about everybody that we're serving. So you're going to have moments. And I had moments where I have cried because I was disappointed in my system and the people that I was with. But at the end of the day, I knew, and I've bucked some people that I probably shouldn't have bucked, but it was okay because I knew I was doing right by our kids, our system, and our schools. But that's what we do. It's a life calling. And if it's not your life calling, don't try this at home. make sure you go get some training and just get knowledge so that you don't step into a minefield because they're out there and everybody does not believe that we should even be looking at equity because we need to be equal and everybody gets the same thing. Let's just be fair, So it's something else, but we can conquer it together.
It sounds like you are. And I don't know if Janelle's frozen, so I'm gonna step in. Looks like she's frozen. Yep, there you are.
Back. This internet connection is not my friend tonight, but I am going to ask you both a question. How can we move from moments in like Black History Month where we just take these movements and periods of time where we want to talk about equity and inclusion and make it more of a day-to-day for inclusion in the workplace, in the schools? How do you have any suggestions for that?
I'm like,
either or. Who want to go?
So I've been at my new company for 3 months, and the first thing that I walked into was, silly enough, the calendar. Hey, it's December. We need to approve holidays. What do you want to approve? And we had been in this journey. So I was leading one organization where like Juneteenth came up, and I'm looking at this calendar. So I walk into the organization. The first thing I'm asking for is data. I want to understand who works here, what are the demographics, what's it look like as we go into leadership versus individual contributor, et cetera. And I think what really stood out to me is, and this didn't go over well, just to be really transparent with you, I didn't believe that adding Juneteenth was going to change anything. I actually thought it would do the opposite. I thought what it was going to create was a little bit of resentment, and you got your one day, so then everybody should be happy about it. And I didn't want that to be kind of the stamp that I started with. So it was really important to me, again, to create that space for inclusion. So I'm trying to talk to, obviously, my African American colleagues, our Hispanic Latinx, right? Lots of different levels of it. So we created something called an Inclusion Day. And it has been simple, but one of the most powerful things I've ever done in a workplace. And so what we said was this: we believe in creating a culture where everyone can do their best work. And we know we have very specific barriers. We know we have racism in our workplace. We called it and we labeled it for exactly what it was. And then we said, so we're not going to we'll never solve the problem because there's not enough holidays to cover the representation that we have in our company. We just won't, because then we're being asked, well, there's our Muslim Day. Well, what about this? We're just never going to get there. And so we decided to do two things. We created a day. It was actually last week. It was this Monday, March 22nd. It's a day of inclusion. And we created an intent to include challenge that will happen all year round. So every month it'll be a different focus. But what we're really looking for is two things. A, what can we each do to create an inclusive work environment? But B, own your stuff. What are you doing? And be intentional and be honest where you're not. And then how are we holding people accountable to behave differently? And I have to tell you, I've been really shocked to hear from managers. Someone said to me, I was in an interview and I couldn't pronounce the young man's name. And I just felt, it started with that. And so it was uncomfortable. And as we went through the conversation, like he met all the criteria on paper, but just didn't quite feel right. Is that a bias? I'm not being inclusive, right? And it was so stunning to me that something that simple created the space for somebody to ask a question that I just feel as if would have never taken place before that. So I am such a strong believer in everything starts with creating space for conversations to get people talking and to get people to be honest about what their barriers are, because we all have them. And if you can start with that, then we can move away from, I need a holiday or a month, because I'll be honest, like a month's not enough. Like I need every day of the year. Like with my experience and what I've been through, like Black History Month just does not cover it. It just doesn't. So it's almost silly to me at this point. And it's not that you shouldn't celebrate it, but it's bigger than that. People's life experiences and the challenges they face because of how they're perceived simply by how they look is so much bigger than a month. And so that's a simple one of the things that we're doing to try to create that space. It's a journey and so much more that we can do. But in my first 90 days, that's where we started. And that ties to kind of one of our layers when we talk about our diversity strategy. We think about what does that mean, for our workforce in the workplace and in the marketplace. And so how are we touching all three of those legs to really try and get movement? And then how are we holding ourselves accountable to be doing this work every day in every decision across our leaders, and not kind of the one trick pony shows, like the event driven, we should all be excited because we had a holiday. So that's some of the stuff that we're doing.
I like that because we don't have that, and I've never heard of anybody doing that. So that's really, really cool.
I felt really original with that one. Thank you very much.
I like it. For me, to her point, I'm Black every day. I'm a woman every day, not just a month. I don't turn a different color after February 28th, right? So there is no. I don't have a formal way, but this is my informal way, and this is my belief, and this is what's worked for me. We celebrate everything all the time. Okay, so when my teachers, we just had Teacher of the Year, and I didn't say anything, but I always go back and I paid attention. I was like, we have 5 campuses out here, and I looked at who was named. I was like, wait, some teachers of color. Oh my gosh, and I'm proud. I'm just proud. I don't care who it was. I was just proud that, we had the diversity. But I think we just need to make sure that we're celebrating all the time. It does not have to be in February. We don't celebrate women just in March. You celebrate everybody all the time. And then it's not, oh my gosh, it's Black History Month. I got to do something for Black folks. No. We're celebrating all the time because this is our lifestyle. This is our belief. This is our culture and our environment. And I think that's the part that people miss is just start. How can we create the space to have the conversations? How can you make sure that we're saying, are we thinking, because in my mind, I'm thinking about race and gender all the time. So if I'm looking at my data for my kids, I'm looking at that. Yes, I'm looking at grade levels because I'm supposed to, an AP and on level and special ed, but I'm looking at where my boys at, where my girls at, where my Black kids, where my white kids, where my Hispanic kids. And so if we're in a place to where we can have those conversations every day, it's not, oh, I got to wait for the month to talk about something Black or something good that a Black person did, right? No, we celebrate everybody. And if we're inclusive all the time, we don't have to worry about that. And I think that's our problem as a system. Yes, I understand why Black History Month was created. I do. But what else can we do to expand the knowledge? Because yes, in our schools, it's unfortunate that our kids only know about MLK. That cannot be the only African American person you know about in the history of your K through 12 experience in schools, right? And I'm not saying that's the only person, but that's kind of like sometimes the only person. So how do we have very diverse texts in our classrooms? How do we have conversations and create spaces for students to have these conversations? Because guess what? If you go to any cafeteria in the country and you just walk in on any given day, pre-COVID, you will see segregated cafeterias, right? So how do we have, let's call it, they do something like, it's called Mix Up Day, but basically you go and you sit by somebody you don't know, right? And you make a new friend. So a cheerleader goes and sits by somebody in, I don't know, choir. So it's just, you mix it up and diversify it. So I think we have to be intentional. But I think before you get to, let's make sure we're doing this, we have to start with some basics. Let's open the door and hopefully have a conversation. And that's what I've learned that helps us open the door to make sure that we're celebrating everybody. It's not just a month. Like, I'm a woman, 365. This is me, right? I don't want to be celebrated just in March. I want to be celebrated every day. Because I know I'm beautiful. I know I'm smart, right? All those different things that we know about ourselves. So we have to make sure that we just build that into the culture and the fabric of who we are as a system, as a campus, as a district, and, to your point, as an organization.
Wow, you reminded me of Mix It Up lunches. I can't wait till COVID's over to do those again.
Yes, those are like simple and sweet.
Yes, thank you. We are running out of time, and this discussion is so rich, but there is one question that I just have to ask, and we want to leave just a little bit of time at the end if anybody else has questions. What is, and this is to either or both of you, what is the best way to recruit, retain, and support a diverse staff to reflect your population? I'm especially interested in the recruitment because sometimes I don't know that we have the right guidance or direction, or, where do we start with that?
This could be a long answer. You want to
I know. I can start,
30
and
seconds.
I'll give you the shorter answer for mine for education because I'm very passionate about this too, and then I'll let you take it home. In general experiences, the staff that I have supported have not always looked for diverse candidates. Okay. And maybe we did not know how. And so with my leadership, what we did at, I'll say 2 campuses that I'll say principal and associate principal of, we really went out, I'll say beyond what was required. So UT is in Austin, right? We always go to UT, we do Texas State, but I'm like, Houston Tillotson's right there. Why are we not accessing that school? It's right there in our backyard, right? So Prairie View's down the street, like all these different schools that we were not tapping into. So I'm bold, I'm crazy. I'm like, okay, so these are some places that we can go if we're not. And I know one of my districts did start, going outside of just the stereotypical go to these schools. And I can't knock it. I'm a Longhorn. Anybody, I'm not talking about us. But, that we had to kind of go outside of just the norm, because that's where you're going to find what? Teachers of color. Because sometimes they just go to the HBCU, Historically Black College University, right? But also, I would really go and I would read as the principal. Now, I had APs who could do that stuff, but I'm going to show you that you can find diverse, qualified candidates. I would go and I would read all the resumes. I would look at names. I would look at where are you at right now? And then I would find out, I will go look you up and see, okay, what is your background? What is your this? What is your that? And then we used to do pre-screening. So I get you on the phone and I talk to you. And I'm like, okay, what are you talking about? What do you believe? What do you believe about our kiddos? And then I get you in our space with our team. And then I ask questions that would make you tell me a little bit more about you than you want to. So there's ways that you can ask questions that are culture responsive, and they speak to what you believe about the kids you serve. So, for example, if I asked a question about like a little boy's running in a museum, what do you do? Right? They're going to start talking about that little boy. And sometimes they might even give a little boy a name and a color. Oh my God. If that happens, you won't be working in my school. Right? So there's ways to ask questions to see what they believe. Now, do you have to be a person of color to teach kids of color? No. I do want you to believe in my Black kid, my white kid, my brown kid, my yellow kid, my female, my male, my special ed student, my GT kid. That's what I want to know. And you ask questions that get to the heart of that. At one of my campuses before I left, we had the most diverse staff. And it paid dividends because we ended up having the highest scores in English, but it was my African American students. They performed higher than the rest of the campuses. So we were getting results that people weren't paying attention to or noticing because we were intentional. I found a teacher who's an IB teacher who's African American. They had never had an African American IB teacher. But I'm like, oh, my IB kids are not white. They're white, brown, they're Hispanic, they're everything. So you have to go look, because sometimes our systems are created to where like, I'm going to pick this person. And I'm like, wait, this is stale. Like, this is not going to reach kids and engage them. I said it nice, but you have to go, you have to be intentional and then teach your team how to seek out candidates who can reach all of our kids and who always don't look one way.
Thank you. I'm going to have to talk to you some more because I'm not taking notes and I need to be.
We'll definitely talk.
Thank you. Mrs. Woodson,
So
I
my
want to hear about
mantra, is meet the talent where it is. And COVID has given us an amazing opportunity. And so I think it starts with having a talent strategy. So it's kind of twofold. So it's where are you sourcing talent? If you think about how people get jobs, a lot of it is who's in your network, right? And so one of the
Yes.
first things that I did with my people team is I said, hey, I'm going to ask a question and do not get uncomfortable. There's no right or wrong answer, but it's a question. Anyone on my team, raise your hand if you've had someone from a different race come into your home, like to have dinner with you. Not do you know one or do you have a friend, but who have you actually invited into your home? And they're looking around and they're looking around and they're kind of getting uncomfortable. And I'm like, there's not a right or wrong answer. It just is. So literally in my entire team, no one had. So we just started talking about what happens when your networks look just like you. That's where you're reaching out. Like that's where you're connecting with your friend group. And so I think I start with not believing that people are intentionally excluding, they're intentionally including their in groups, right? And so once you get people to see that, then we can say, okay, that's step one. Now, step two, where are we looking for talent? So to your point, so many phenomenal tools. If you think about LinkedIn is where we do a lot of our sourcing. So you can build in strings and tags for all of the HBCUs. You can start looking at all of those different LinkedIn groups. So every group that's like Black Tech Talent. So I'm working in the software industry where it's really difficult, or at least it's been said, I'm having a pretty easy time finding good talent because I'm going to look for it in the places where that talent sits. And instead of you expecting people to come to you, you meet the talent where it is. So that's the second piece. But the third piece and the most important piece is interview training for managers so that managers understand how can we blind our processes. So for example, this sounds silly, but like resumes, taking off names. So I don't know that it's a female, or I'm not making assumptions about your race based on the name. Looking at your job descriptions, do you really need to have like 15 years of experience to do an entry-level job, or do you really need to have a master's degree? Probably not. So how are we making sure I want great qualified talent, but you start to disproportionately impact people and their access and options when you make the criteria so difficult to come into? And then measuring success, talking to leaders. Like, let's talk about what your team looks like. Is there a reason why you have all white male engineers? I'm just curious because there are lots of schools that produce phenomenal engineers and they're not all white. So it's asking the question and then it's also listening to the answer. So when the manager says, well, the only pool of talent that I had, that's what it looked like. Well, then that's a problem for me to go solve with the people team, right? And so that's putting in place practices that say, hey, we have a new rule. You won't make a hire until you've interviewed at least 3 candidates of color. I promise you they're out there. If you can't even get them to the interview stage, then something is wrong with our recruiting practice. It's not because they're not there. So you have to start holding people accountable and putting practices and rigor and processes in place. And at the end of the day, hire the most qualified candidate. So I'm not an advocate for make sure that every third job opening is filled by X. So I'm not really actually looking for quotas. But what I am saying is if we source talent the right way, we should, at a minimum, be able to have a talent pool that reflects our U.S. demographics. There are a ton of smart, qualified people. Go find them.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And can I add to that real quick? Sometimes, but this is education, don't know if it's yours, but we have had conversations in education, I'll say generally, to where we've had to talk about the fact that who would want to come work with us because we have a track record or history of not wanting women or green people or brown people, so having that conversation is also key. And then going back and revising our system to make sure that that's not the perception, because everybody has a history. And sometimes that history stays out there with you. And so you got to go clean that up before anybody even wants to come to this place.
That's a good call out. Yep.
Ladies, this conversation.
Oh man, Janelle, I'm so sorry. There you are.
There she is. There she is.
We have a
This
couple questions.
conversation.
Yes, we have a couple questions from some of the listeners, and I wanted to just poach a couple of them before we end this call. One of them is from a woman, or from someone who said their husband recently interviewed for a full-time position at a local municipality, and they asked point blank how comfortable he would be working in a place that does inclusion work around equity and diversity. We took this as a good sign for the office culture. It certainly made him want to work there even more. Is this becoming more common, addressing these things right from the get go? Is this becoming more centered in both corporate life and education? You have 30 seconds to respond.
I'll give you a quick answer. Yes. So from a corporate perspective, it's application, it's interview practice, it's all the way through every touch point of helping people understand what we believe in, what we stand for, and what we won't accept. So yes.
And in education in Texas, I'll say we're on our way, but not every district is like that. There is a House bill that's going forward right now where they're looking at possibly having an equity officer at our larger districts across the state. So it's something that you will see. But if the superintendent and the board is ready to tackle it, you'll see it more evident and proactive and forward. If they're not, you won't see it.
Another listener has asked has stated that they work with educators, and the novice teachers have been leaving the profession at a high rate within the first 3 years. What recommendations would you suggest on retaining novice teachers?
I'll take it for education. People stay for, I know, right? I think it's me. People stay for culture and climate. That's the number one thing. And I think we take that for granted. We don't, I'll say, value our people. And what I mean is invest in them, pour into them, and treat them like people. We treat them, you're my subordinate. No. Have a relationship, because when you have a relationship, they'll stay and they'll want to give back. And even on the hardest days like this year, they'll still come back because they know they have a team of people and a team of teachers and a leader that's going to empower them and pour into them and let them cry when they're having a crazy day or when a kid acts up. So it has to be that climate, that culture that has to be there first to reduce the turnover.
Thank you. I'm wondering, and I know we are very short on time here, but I've got to get this one in too. I'd love to get your angle on advice for individuals working within the system and trying to advance their careers as they encounter barriers, particularly young women.
Ms. Woodson, you want to start?
Lisa.
Use your voice. I think my biggest lesson learned, so my mom used to say, closed mouths don't get fed. And that is very applicable. And so using your voice means several things. It means using your voice in your workplace. It means using your voice within your networks. It means asking questions. It means seeking to understand. And so sometimes I think what happens is you're in a situation, you have all these barriers and you're lashing out because you're frustrated and you're not feeling heard. And so I always argue your how, it matters. When I told that story earlier regarding, kind of being the angry Black woman, I am not saying code switch and don't be who you are, but I'm saying be intentional. In the last 5 years, the jumps I've been able to make because I spoke truth to power, but I did it in a way where it was clear, it was concise, it was thoughtful. I didn't just react in the moment. And so really taking that time to use your voice to stand up for yourself is really, really, really important. And the last thing that I would say is take risk. So I am opportunistic. Every opportunity that presented itself, I jumped right in. And there were times when I did not know what I was doing. There were times where it was like, really? I've never actually closed an office or dealt people in Germany, but that's okay. Watch me figure out how to do it. Trusting yourself, yes. Right? Trusting yourself and kind of stepping into your greatness, maybe even before you get great, that's okay too. That will serve you well.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that is you have to have a network. You have to have a friend group, but a professional friend group. So I have several groups of ladies that I partner with. I'm going to be a superintendent when I grow up. So that's my next position, right? Well, guess what? I have superintendent women who are pouring into me even now, right? I have women that I'm pouring into who want to be superintendents, some who want to be principals, some who are just getting into teaching. So pour into others, have people pour into you. And then, like she said, it's his networking. Our men do it all the time, bless their hearts. We have to do it. And guess what? We have to pull each other up and work with each other and help each other out. This is the way we do it. The higher we go, it's less women and there's less people of color. So we have to be intentional and purposeful about not that catty girl stuff. We have to work together, pull each other up and say, you know what, girl, I ain't applying for that job, but you can do that. That's your demographics. That's we have to do that. And then when they're interviewing, guess what? I coach my friends and guess what? They coach me. So when I go in the interview, I got all my people. They're not there, but they're with me because we've prepped. They've questioned me. Let me look at the resume again. I don't like that part right there. Like that's what we do. And that's how you do it. You have to build a network, a team, and then you give back. You have to give back.
I have to just add one
Thank
thing.
you.
That's with that. It's the mentality of bring a friend with you, right? So when you go and you hang out, you want to bring a friend, right? So as you're building your career, sometimes as you're taking steps, you can get very self-focused because you're really thinking about you and what you have to do next. Stop and bring somebody with you. Like make that your mantra. Bring a friend.
I love it.
Thank you. Wow, I'm walking away with so many gold nuggets. You have inspired all of us. I just want to leave the last couple minutes for you to give us some closing statements or comments. In closing,
if you have any, I think you all have given a lot.
Yes, you have.
Just thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to just share our story, my story, experience, and I'm hopefully pouring to somebody else who needed to hear this and see that you can be a woman who looks like this and be successful in whatever you choose to be. You don't have to be in education, but whatever you want to be, you can do it and accomplish it.
Just thank you. I think I'll just leave you with this. Believe in yourself. Believe in your power. It's a choice to let somebody take that away from you. Don't.
Thank you. Thank you so much for letting us learn from you. We will be reaching out with questions and follow-up questions, and I hope that this partnership can be extended and maybe we, make a habit of this, and it doesn't need to be in March, right?
Amen.
Love it.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you
for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.